Hello everyone, Kenton Kavestu from the RocketBlocks team here. In this mock interview video, we're sitting down with Jesse Lau, who's a senior product manager at Amazon, focused on the Kindle product. And in this particular interview, we're going to be doing a product execution question focused on the popular grocery delivery app Instacart. And they're seeing a decline in one of their core metrics. So let's go ahead and jump in and see how Jesse walks through this.
Okay, so let's imagine you are a product manager working on Instacart, the grocery delivery app, and you walk in one day and your manager pulls you aside and says, "Hey, order deliveries, the number of orders placed on a day-to-day basis is down 4% week over week from where it was last week, and we don't know what's going on. We need you to help us figure it out." So my question to you is, how would you figure out what's going on and sort of walk me through that process? And feel free to ask any clarifying questions or ask for more info if you need it.
Yeah. So the first thing I would do is ask, is this a real problem or a not real problem? Like,
Tell me more. What do you mean by that? How do we
yeah,
decide whether it's real or not real?
yeah. Like, is 4% a normal fluctuation that you might see week over week, especially if it fits inside of a normally understandable seasonal pattern?
Yep.
So shopping goes up before Thanksgiving and things like that. So
Yep.
if last week was Thanksgiving, for instance, then perhaps this week is down because last week was abnormally high.
Good point. So you're basically like, is this normal, or is there like a really high comp the week before that makes this look like we're down, but we're just reverting to the mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, fair question. So the normal sort of week to week fluctuation is about 1%, 1.5%. So 4% does seem high, which is why it caught our attention. And then to your question about, is this a high comp issue like it was Thanksgiving last week or something like that that spiked orders up? That is not the case. We're sort of mid-June, so it doesn't seem like there's sort of any obvious, reason why it would have spiked up last week.
Got it. Okay. So it is a real problem. So okay, let's go work on it. One of the things I've done in my past is we will set up predictive alarms against some of our metrics. So they'll actually, they'll notice when there is higher variability in our data over time, and the alarms will expand their allowable range of variance in those periods.
Yep.
So it's good to know that this would have triggered that alarm.
Yep.
Okay, cool. The second thing I'd want to know then is what's the geography we're talking about here? So I presume we're primarily focused on the U.S.
Yep. So fair point. So right now we're 100% operating in U.S. markets. So you're dealing with just one country, and happy to answer any sort of other geography questions you have beyond that too.
Yeah, I'm curious. Is that 4% consistent across the U.S., or do we see variance in different regions?
So good question. One question back for you is like, what type of cuts would you want to see, or if you could sort of wave your magic wand, like how would you want to grab? To answer your own question there.
Mm-hmm. I'm not exactly certain yet, but I mean, typical cuts I might make at a time like this where I'm just initiating an investigation would be, one would be geographical.
Yeah.
In terms of regions, right?
Okay,
like
so you just
the West,
the
Northeast.
That's what I was asking. You just cut it by some regions.
Yeah, I mean that's one way. Another way I would think about is urban versus suburban versus rural.
Okay.
And then I don't know, like if I knew this industry better, I might instead of cutting by region, I might cut by like who our key partners are, right?
Okay. So like
I don't know.
Grocery partners.
Yeah, like if we had some change in our relationship with Albertsons or something like that might.
Yeah. Okay, so that's fair. So those are three interesting ways to cut it. I can go retrieve that data for you. The first one, which was geographic regions. So we've returned basically Western U.S., the Midwest, the Northeast, and the Southeast. And it does look like the 4% is basically down across the board. Like
it is down across
like
the board.
3.8, and the West and 4.5 in the Northeast, whatever. But it's like all around the same, hovering around that same 4%.
Okay.
The second cut that you mentioned around rural urban, same thing there. There's a little bit of variance, but we're not seeing that like rural is up and urban is down or anything like that. They're both sort of down around 4%.
Okay.
And then the last one you mentioned, similar story there. Like if you cut it by grocery partner, which is an interesting idea. We don't see any, there's no like obvious smoking gun that like, hey, Albertsons, to use your example, is falling off a cliff for some reason.
Got it. So it feels pretty evenly dispersed across the country.
Yeah.
What about competition? Has anything changed in the competitive landscape?
Yeah. Good question. So in terms of major stuff happening in the marketplace right now, I mean, this is not new, but so for the last couple of years, Instacart has been competing against Amazon and Amazon's line of grocery delivery stuff, which I think is called Amazon Fresh. And that's like evolved and changed a little bit over the years, but nothing to our knowledge has changed in the last week with that. We haven't seen anything there. There have been some rumblings, like if you read like TechCrunch, that type of stuff, that Uber is considering getting into grocery delivery in a bigger business. Obviously, that they operate in a tangential space with Uber Eats. There are some similarities there, and clearly they know a little bit about logistics, but there's no as far as we know, they don't have any material presence. They're not actually testing it. It's just sort of like TechCrunch rumors at this point.
Interesting. I'm curious to know if there's any way that, I'm just thinking out loud here, but I'm curious to know if there's any way that those just rumblings about Uber could have driven some sort of impact. Sorry, it seems like you have something you're going to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think hard to know for sure from my perspective. I mean, certainly, consumers might have heard something. My guess is it seems unlikely. But
yeah,
if you have a specific idea of how that might translate into something like this, I'd be curious to hear it for sure.
Oh, I don't think this is a very good idea, but I'll share it. I've known Uber to be pretty competitive. So I could envision a world where they might, especially competitive on the supply side. Okay. So this seems almost nonsensical to me, or certainly not a sustainable business strategy. But I could imagine them starting to hire delivery people in preparation for a launch or something like that. But I couldn't imagine that would lead to such a large impact on Instagram.
That is interesting. And so take me to like if Uber were doing that, for example, or some other competitor out there was doing the same thing, what's the logical chain of how that would affect the overall sort of decline in orders we're seeing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that what would happen is our delivery windows would either shrink, or they would shrink, or they would get further out. And so as a customer, I mean, this has happened to me several times in the last with Amazon in the last year, where during moments of what feel like more of like a crisis, the delivery windows become less and less available. And in that case, I presume it's because the orders are up. But in general, if there's less labor supply from Instacart to go pick the groceries and bring them by, then that becomes a less interesting option for me as a customer, and I probably get somewhere else to order. Just do it myself.
Okay, interesting. That is a fair point. I could see that happening, and I know what you're talking about. Certainly, in periods of spike demand, those delivery windows increase. But the sort of logic of like, hey, if our essentially drivers and shopper agents were getting poached, and then the delivery times, spiked up, I could see, users bulking and basically not placing orders. So that's interesting. Let me ask you this: like, if you wanted to try and prove or disprove whether that was going on. And again, you can wave your magic wand and pull some data. What type of data would you want to see whether that hypothesis holds water?
Huh. So I think let me think about this for a sec. I'll just go ahead and think out loud.
Yeah.
So I suppose one thing we could look at is whether the gap for those who did submit orders, whether the gap in time order is placed until time delivery is made has increased.
Okay.
I think we could also look at in the clickstreams data. I imagine we could look at the point of purchase when you're told when your delivery window is, if we're seeing extra drop off there or somewhere else.
Okay.
Yeah, so those are the two ideas that pop off the top of my head.
Okay. So you want to look at essentially the first thing you mentioned was average delivery, like how long does it take to get the delivery?
Yeah.
And the second thing you want to look at is, are we seeing a bigger drop off from when you first see the window to placing an order than we typically see? Okay, sounds good. So we can look those both up. Average delivery time is on par. No material changes that seem outside of regular standard deviation. And similar with the drop-off rate, we're not seeing like a spike in drop-off rates. So it doesn't seem like that might be the case.
Yeah, it didn't feel like a super strong hypothesis to me, but since you brought up the Uber thing, I wanted to check in on it. I wonder if this might be potentially a self-inflicted wound, where we've changed something about either our recommendation or sorting algorithms for shoppers that they're just purchasing, their average cart is less than it was before.
Okay. So what information would you like to know, or sort of what would you, I guess, ask your fellow PMs, or what type of information would you try and gather there?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest thing would be to look and see if there were any A/B tests run or changes made to the shopping to the shopping site that may have had a negative impact.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah,
makes sense. So I can retrieve some of that info for you here. Essentially, there are 3 main experiments running right now, 3 product experiments going on. The first is there's an experiment that they're playing around with the logic that displays the suggested items that show up on the home screen of the app when you're placing an order. So when you log into Instacart as a user, Instacart will suggest items that you've purchased in the past to put back in your cart this time.
Yeah.
And this experiment is essentially changing the logic of how those suggestions work.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. The second thing that your teammates mentioned is there's another experiment going on where some users, this is 30% of users, are receiving new push notifications, which are alerting them about deals happening in their local area for the grocery stores that are supported on Instacart. So for example, this would be like, if I actually don't know if Albertsons is in Seattle, but like if Albertsons were having a special, Instacart might notify you as an Instacart customer, like, hey, if you shop at Albertsons this week, you'll get 10% off all your stuff.
Okay, can I dive into that one really quickly, and then I do want to get back to the third one, but I want to ask a couple of questions on that one. So this is a new push notification strategy that didn't exist before.
Correct, entirely new. We didn't do this in the past.
Okay, and then the and what those push notifications do is they alert customers to specific deals in their local area.
Yeah.
Okay. I have one other follow-up question on the prompt to make sure I didn't misunderstand the prompt at the beginning.
Yep.
When we said orders are down 4%, do we mean the average order size, or do we mean the total amount of orders?
It's a good question. We mean the total amount of orders.
Okay, because My initial instinct was if we're push notifying on discounted deals, maybe we're having more and more orders, but the average ticket on those orders is lower. But it sounds like that's not the case. So
that's a good question and good clarification. The 4% down is definitely on the absolute number of orders placed, not the average order size.
Got it. Great. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. And the third experiment running is that there is an update to essentially the color palette that's been used and the layout of the two parts of the checkout flow, basically the checkout overall and the part that comes right before the checkout, which is when the user has selected the items that they want in their cart. And they go to checkout. There's a screen right before that basically says, if this if this good is not there, do you want us to just not deliver it, or do you want us to replace it with something else? There's basically this UI that lets people make a decision there. So the color palette and the layout of those screens has been adjusted to match some redesign that happened to the general Instacart app about 3 months ago. But this part was done last. It was sort of the last to be done.
Got it. Okay. Well, I will. So taking those, I'm gonna break those down into 4 parts.
Okay.
I recognize that the color and layout are one and the same, but I'm gonna split those 2 things apart.
Okay.
And say that so I'm gonna go ahead and say that my hypothesis is that the 2 most important things for us to dig into here are the logic of suggested items.
Okay.
And the layout of the checkout flow.
Okay. And why do you say those 2 things out of the 4 that I mentioned?
I mean, it's well established now that that like algorithmic recommendations work, and homepage is a good place to put algorithmic recommendations.
Yeah.
So my instinct is very, very small changes on algorithms recommending what to buy when you open an app could have really big impacts on our business. Okay. So that's the one I would investigate really deeply. I would guess whoever made that change is watching that closely. I would hope so. And then on the layout, I think the color I think is important, and it is. I've worked in places where I've made a button blue and made more money because of it. So I know that can happen. Yep. It's just less likely than a layout change. And I could envision a world here where a layout change especially on the replace item flow has changed in such a way that previously we were getting lots of replacements. And now the decision is that instead of getting a replacement, we're just, removing an item from an order, which could have had a negative impact. I'll give an example for me personally, actually pretty recently in this exact experience is for a long time when I ordered on Amazon, they would recommend a replacement only if there was a close replacement.
Okay.
And so I guess I never remember which one's type 1 and which one's type 2 error, but they would default to a smaller cart because, if they couldn't find something that was pretty close, they would get rid of it. The last time I ordered and there wasn't a replacement, they just the shopper just threw some random thing in there that was nothing like what I wanted. And so I had to actively go in and say no, thank you. I do not want that.
Yeah.
And so they have an error of inclusion rather than an error of exclusion. And I'd be pretty concerned about that potentially happening over here as well.
And so your hypothesis there is, just to make sure I understand, you're saying that behavior of then getting the wrong items might frustrate people, and they might just place less orders in the future, and that would lead to the ordering decrease that we're seeing? Or am I misunderstanding?
It is either so I am, thank you for clarifying. I am considering, I suppose, 2 things. One is that would throw off a customer. They may not want to place an order in the future. Okay. That could certainly happen. Another could just be as simple as layout change, especially, I mean, adding the color change to it would exacerbate this. It's just unfamiliar for the customer. And there may even just be, it's not that hard to engender a 1 or 2 percentage points of mistakes of people accidentally canceling orders. And that would, from my perspective, like I've had experiences where I've put like 37 items into a cart and then them not get purchased, and I'm like, forget it, I'm just going to the store.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I could also see that happening.
Okay, cool. So thank you for clarifying why you sort of highlighted those two things out of the four as you sort of broke it down. Starting at sort of the top of those, the first one was you talked about sort of the algorithmic changes on the logic there. If you could, grab the PM that's running that experiment, what would you want to ask him or her to see if it feels like maybe that's having an impact, or what?
Oh, I would hope that they ran an A/B test, and I would hope I could look at the results of their A/B test.
Okay,
yeah.
Got it. So they did run an A/B test, and they did look at, for the folks in the new variant, how many of those sort of suggested items did they end up placing into their cart versus, how many on average versus the old variant, and what was the average cart size versus the old cart size, and what was the average likelihood of opening the app to placing an order. So what was the drop off for folks in both variants? And they found that basically across the board, they saw about a 1% to 2% increase in those metrics. So about 1% to 2% more items from the suggested list were getting added, slightly higher performance of actually completing the actual order, and slightly higher order value.
Great. So now we got to find like -6% of sales loss. Well, good. Well, let's dial that one up, and then we won't. We'll be down to just -1, I suppose.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Let's keep going. Maybe jump to 3, and then we can. If 3 doesn't feel like the right one, then we can go back to push notifications.
Okay. Cool. So we'll skip push notifications. On the third, again, just if you could wave your magic wand, what type of metrics, and there is an A/B test running on this, but what type of metrics would you ideally want to see for this third experiment about changes?
Yeah, I mean, I think in commerce, my experience is it's super important to always measure the purchase if you can, right? Like get to as close to measuring the purchase as possible against every single A/B test. So like there should be a metric of aggregate, both total orders and aggregate purchase value on both this A/B test and the first one we described. Okay. So I want that one, but you can also look at other pieces of data too. In particular, we can look at especially in both the pre-checkout page and the checkout page. Hopefully, we can A/B test the number of like dropped shopping carts that happen at each of those stages.
Okay,
and that should give us a much more direct sense as to whether this was the cause of the reduction in orders.
Okay. Sounds good. So the information we've got is that this experiment was running on 30% of live customers. So 70% were in the default experience, 30% were running in this new variant. Average order value for the customers in the 30% was actually up about 1.5%. And the number of orders placed relative to control was down about 21%.
Ooh. Whoops. Yeah. So clearly, this is a problem.
I would agree.
So first of all, I mean, just in general, I'd be pretty, it's what it sounds like to me is that this change was more oriented around the brand than it was around business improvement.
Yeah.
And that the rest of the brand had changed its color palette and layout before this one, and that we wanted to make this one match that. And that's okay. That's important. Brand value is important, and it's much harder to A/B test, but it's important.
Yeah.
It is not, in my mind, an acceptable thing to do to compromise financial performance for improving the consistency of a brand to this level. And I think it was, to be honest, kind of careless to have dialed this experiment all the way up to 30% when you didn't have a hypothesis about, or when the initiating hypothesis for doing it was not growing revenue. My hunch, based on the fact that average order value is up, but the total number of orders is down, is either customers are either or both customers are just getting confused and exiting the app because they're confused, or we're asking them to do a lot more work in order to like select which products they're keeping and not keeping, and either making them do it or something like that. And so the folks who do decide to do it are buying more, but way more folks are just choosing not to buy, and that's a pretty unacceptable outcome. So I'd immediately dial this experiment down and go back to the drawing board with the design and orient the design first around certainly acknowledging the color palette and layout specifications that we want to consider, but orienting the experiment around growing or at least maintaining our order levels.
Got it. Okay, sounds good. Well, I think you did a good job at identifying the driver of our client here, and I agree with the recommendations that brand is important, but we need to make sure that it can be holistically sort of incorporated without driving a material decline in our business metrics.
Cool. Thank you.
Good.